chapter 11 of the story. Here we go.
One day, God told the prophet Samuel that it was time for a new king and sent him to the house of a man named Jesse. Jesse had 7 sons and brought out each of them to meet Samuel. Samuel told Jesse that David, his youngest son, would be the future king of Israel. Shortly after this, an army of the Philistines, Israel's enemy, set up camp on a hill right across the valley from Israel's army. For 40 days in a row, a gigantic Philistine warrior named Goliath would walk down to the valley and mock the Israelites. The Israelites were terrified of Goliath and wouldn't fight him. But one day when David was visiting the army camp, he heard Goliath taunting the Israelites and asked why no one was willing to fight Goliath. After getting King Saul's permission, David went down into the valley and shouted to Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Goliath and David charged toward one another. As they ran, David pulled out a stone, put it in a sling, and flung it at the giant. The stone struck Goliath directly in the forehead, and then David killed him with Goliath's own sword. This victory caused David to become so loved and respected that King Saul became very jealous. Filled with fear and rage, Saul tried to kill David, but David escaped into the desert, and Saul and his army followed. One day, Saul was in a cave and David snuck up on him. But David could not bring himself to kill Saul. When Saul realized what had happened, he broke down crying and made a peace treaty with David, promising he would not kill him. But not long after, Saul became jealous and tried to kill David again. About the same time, the Philistines attacked the Israelites and killed all 3 of Saul's sons. When Saul heard the news, he was so upset that he took out his own sword, fell on it, and killed himself. Then, David was named King of Israel. He made plans to build a giant building called a temple as a place to worship God. But God spoke to David through his friend Nathan, telling him not to build the temple. God said a temple would eventually be built, but by one of David's sons. One of David's descendants would become a king unlike any before, one whose rule would never end.
If you're part of the Sunday school group here, or maybe if you're going online at stmarkgreenwood.com and watching that videos each week from the story, you will know that we're in chapter 11. And that's kind of the highlight of chapter 11. And I'm not going to say much about David and Goliath on this day because you can watch that on the video, and that's what the Sunday school hour is teaching as well. But it is a story that is in the book of 1 Samuel, and it's a great story about facing your giants. And I will say a word or two about that this morning, and maybe you'll pick up on some of that, David and Goliath and the facing of the giants portion of that story as well. Our lesson title this morning, or scripture title, is Appointed as Ambassadors to the World, and that's who we are and what we are called to be and to do. And so you'll know, and across the world, if they watch it on this video, I am trying this little pointer. And in order for it to work, I have to kind of be on spot, and it's got us right there. So now it's got us too far. And it says to us, the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king from among his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint him for me, the one whom I name to you." Samuel did what the Lord commanded, and he came to Bethlehem. And The elders of the city came out to meet him, trembling, and said, "Do you come peacefully?" He said, "Peaceably I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height or his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." That's from 1 Samuel 16 and the first 7 verses. Our word this morning is mourn no more. Mourn no more. And that's how that report goes out. It said, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, you have mourned long enough for Saul." You have mourned long enough for him. So Saul didn't make it as king. Saul didn't listen to God. We talked about that over the last few weeks. Saul rejected what God had planned. Saul pulled out of the program slowly. Now, it looked like in the beginning Saul was going to do a great thing, and Saul had been anointed by God. God told Samuel, "Go anoint Saul. He's going to be the king." The people wanted a king. God gave them a king, even though it was going to cost them. The Bible even lists out that it was going to cost them some of their property, some of their freedoms. It was going to cost them taxes that the king was going to place on them, but they wanted the king anyway. So God let them have a king, and King Saul began to drift away from God. He began to do evil even in the sight of God and lead the people of Israel away from God, and that angered God. And then God sent Samuel back to Saul and said, "Saul, just as you were anointed to be king, now God's favor is no longer on you, and God is going to look for a different person, a different king who will have the heart of God, or will be after the heart of God," and that one is David. So Samuel is mourning all this taking place here. He's mourning all of this and what's happening. And finally, God says, and we don't know finally, that word behind it, what it means, how long of a period there. But God comes to Samuel, the prophet, and he says, "Stop mourning. Stop mourning." In our lives, I just wanted us to kind of deviate from following David and Goliath today and concentrate a moment on our lives and how oftentimes in our lives we mourn things and how we mourn them in our lives, and sometimes we don't even know that's what's taking place. We don't know how long we've been mourning. We don't know how long it's been that we've been in a state of mourning. It may be following someone's death. It may be following a separation of a friendship in our lives. It may be in a separation or divorce in our lives, and we mourn things in our lives on and on. I've got a couple of songs that some of you might remember, and Ken, I'm just going to ask you to flip to the next one. It's going to be easier for me to do that. So I wanted you to flip, and you'll see Otis Redding. And there's a song that Otis Redding sang that was so popular, and most of you would know it from some of the words that are sitting there. "Sitting on the dock of the bay." How many of you remember that, if you'd raise your hand? Yep. And we still sing that song today. But listen to the words behind that song, because it implies some of the mourning, some of the being chained by the past in the present circumstances that Redding is singing about. It says, "Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting there when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, then I'll watch them roll away again. Yeah, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I'm just sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time." He says, "I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay, 'cause I had nothing to live for. It looked like nothing gonna come my way. So I'm just sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away." I'm just sitting on the dock wasting time. Left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay because I had nothing to live for. It looks like nothing's going to come my way. Sometimes in our lives, that's perhaps the way we feel. We get trapped in a situation, or we get trapped in some type of mourning setting where we're just down and out about something that's going on in our life, something we either did or something that was done to us, and we go through this season, if you will, or this time of mourning in our lives, and it holds back on our lives, and it holds back much of what God would have planned for us because we're kind of stuck there in this mourning. I found another, Ken, if you'd roll to the next one. Now, some of you would even better remember this. If you look on that list, I'm going to guess that one of the most popular is, have you ever seen the rain? Who would say that would be a favorite of yours on that list? Okay, I see some hands. Don't be ashamed. You can put it up. How about, where's that one at? Proud Mary. That was a pretty popular song. That was a pretty popular song. The other is Bad Moon Rising. There it is in the middle. I can see it now. The Bad Moon Rising. The interesting thing about Bad Moon Rising as a song was that one and the one about the rain is, it reminds us of some of the Creedence Clearwater Revival problems that they were having in their band. And John Fogerty, when he was talking about those songs, he simply said of those songs, or Fogerty said, there was such tension in our band when those songs were being written that in spite of being on top of the charts and surpassing all expectations of fame and fortune and income, we were rich and famous, he says, but all the band members were depressed and unhappy. Even in the midst of writing those songs. One of those main songs that they wrote 2 years after, or shortly, less than that actually, the band broke up and couldn't get back together again. He goes on to say, despite all of our fame, all of us were unhappy and depressed. That's an amazing thing, because we used to sing those songs. I never knew it was from a group of people that were unhappy and depressed. It kind of takes away a little bit of the song as I think about it, that they were unhappy and depressed, but the songs seem to make us oftentimes feel so much better. I never knew all of that when I was growing up. And I think that a lot of us, when we're around people who are depressed or people that are extremely unhappy, maybe not to the realm of depressed, but when we're around people like that, we don't really notice it. We don't really take it to heart, because we just don't know. We don't know what's going on in their lives. We don't know what they're going through. And those are really, really tough times in their lives. But that song in particular reminds us of some of that. I want to, if you'd roll to the next one, in seeing this particular slide, I think about Jesus inviting all those that are going through those times when we are told to mourn no more, when we're told to come unto Jesus, who will bring us comfort. Come unto Jesus, who will offer us support. Come unto Jesus, who will help lift us up even when we're down. Come unto Jesus in those moments and in those opportunities. Jesus invites us to come to Him. Kind of like He said, for the simplicity of this, Samuel, stop mourning. Jesus calls out to us as well and says, stop mourning. There's another song that was real popular, and this one actually in the church setting, that simply says, I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside. How many of you remember that song? Yep. I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside. And it goes on and says, I'm not going to study war no more. And that song was actually written in the 20s, 1920. That's a long time ago, way before I was ever born. Maybe some of you were, I'm not sure, but I wasn't. And that's a long time ago in my book. But that song being written was spiritual, about a lot of tension in our world And it was a song that says, mostly from the African American community, that they're going to lay down their burdens down by the riverside. The burdens of finding freedom in a world that was harsh and heavy toward them. Or it could be also about just people that were involved in war in their own life in particular. But I'm going to lay down my burden down by the riverside. And I'm not going to study war anymore. And it says also, they're going to lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. And another verse goes on to say, I'm going to try on my long white robe down by the riverside. Another verse says, I'm going to try on my crown, my starry crown, down by the riverside, meaning that God is interacting, God is working in their lives, and God is doing something wonderful there. And it's not just a baptismal robe, but it's probably symbolic of even the robes of people that have gone on to be with the Lord that you read about in the book of Revelations, or the crowns that are given out to people that are faithful with the gospel. It's a powerful song, going to lay down my burdens. And it's a song about releasing burdens and giving burdens back, or turning burdens over to God, as we could say. And that's what we do in worship. And that's what God means for us when he says, let's stop mourning. Don't mourn anymore. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to walk in here today and I'm going to pop you in top of the head and say, be healed, and your burdens are all going to wash away and your burdens are all going to disappear. But God says in worship, that's where we come and we lay down our burdens. We come to worship and we invite other people into worship because we experience the healing of God in and of ourselves. And when we come to worship, that's what happens in our lives. We come anticipating, we come expecting God to do something amazing, God to do something miraculous. And what happens oftentimes in our churches and in our own lives, if we aren't careful, we'll lose that sight. We come to church because maybe that's what we were taught to do. Or we come to church and we're looking for something, but we're not exactly sure what we're looking for, but we'll know it when we find it. Sometimes it's, quite frankly, in all honesty, if they got a pretty playground, we like it. If they got a good nursery, we like it. If they got a good school, we like it. If they got good music, we like it. We sometimes forget that really what we need to do is find a place where we can lay down our burdens, and that all of what we just said, the playground, the nursery, the music, all of it ties into providing a place where people can meet Christ and lay down their burdens. And that's what Jesus is telling Samuel. Samuel, you got a job to do, and I want you to stop mourning because I've got somewhere I need to send you, and I've got something I want you to do. I want you to think about your church setting, and I want you to think about when you come to church, what is it what anticipation do you bring? Do you bring that God's going to do something wonderful and glorious and mighty in my church today, and that I'm coming there prepared for it? I'm coming to see what God is going to do. I'm coming anticipating that God is going to do something either in my life and help me with this burden that I'm carrying, or this burden between me and my spouse, or this burden between me and my employer, this burden between me and my friend, this burden between me and my children that oftentimes is so heavy, any of those burdens in our lives, that I want to give up that burden. And I want to hear God say to me, can say to me, stop mourning. I've got something for you. I've got some healing for you. I've got a direction for you. Collectively, as a church, that's what God says to all of us in leadership roles in a church. That stop mourning. I've got something for you to do. If you're a Sunday school teacher, if you're a leader, if you're a song leader, if you're a worship leader, if you're a member of this church in any capacity in leadership, that's what God says to us. You've got a job here, a task here to do something, and that is to create an environment where people's lives can be challenged, where people's lives can be changed, and where people can confess to God that, God, I need help. I need this burden lifted from my life. Don't mourn anymore, because that's what God does for us. One of the reasons we're even doing a prayer center or a prayer connection corner is because we hadn't had in years an altar environment right here. And normally in a contemporary setting, that oftentimes that happens when we start out. We don't have a kneeling rail or a place where people can kneel. We know everybody can pray right out there where they're seated. My question would be simply, do we actually do that? Do we feel that connection that we're looking for? Or would something more help? Someone told me that if we had a place to kneel, they'd certainly kneel, because they're not going to come and just stand and lean up here on the rail up here. It's an interesting thing, because it's a task of ours to create an environment where people can come and lay down their burden, where people can come and pray not only for their own lives, their own selves, but for someone else as well. It's an interesting place for us to be. Jesus reminds us, blessed are those who mourn, because some people are going to carry that mourning around with them for a long time. And sometimes it's because somebody did something to them and they have trouble letting that thing go. Sometimes it's economic reality that some people live in. They just won't never get out of or do any better. It is that way in their lives and has been. And God says, blessed are those people that mourn and can't get out of it. They shall be comforted. They shall find comfort. God's going to bring comfort in their lives. Unfortunately, for some, it might not be this side of heaven. But we have another foot that we live in both worlds. One foot in this one and one foot in the hope and anticipation of the world to come. And God says they will be comforted. They shall be comforted. They are not left without comfort. And in our worship, that's what Jesus seeks to do, is to wrap his arms around us. In the book of Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13, we are told that we have hope in our Lord Jesus. That we have hope in Jesus, and that we have a hope like nobody else. Ours is not just I hope the weather is pretty today, or I hope it doesn't rain outside. First Thessalonians says to us that our hope is in the Lord, and that our hope is unlike any others. We don't hope as the world hopes. We hope in the Lord Jesus, and that God is there with us, and that God will do something great and wonderful for us. So he says to Samuel, stop mourning, Samuel. Prepare yourself. He's sending Samuel on this journey, and he tells him to prepare himself. Flip that slide for me there. Prepare yourself for the journey. We get one more. Flip me again. Over in 1 Peter chapter, we read, therefore, prepare your minds for actions. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace that is given to you. Prepare yourself for what God is doing. Prepare yourself for something in life that God wants to do in your life. Prepare yourself. He tells Samuel that. Then he flipped that next slide. You'll see this horn. And he says to Samuel, Samuel, fill that horn with anointing oil, because I'm sending you down to Jesse's house to anoint one of his children to be king of all of Israel. Samuel, stop mourning. Prepare yourself. Got something for you to do. Fill your horn, your anointing satchel, some call it, your vase, some have said. Fill it and go anoint the guy down at Jesse's house that I'm going to show you. And you know the story. He brings David out to anoint him. And that's a wonderful thing, because that's part of our call too. We're called the anointed of God. We are called the approved of God because of our gift of the Lord Jesus Christ. We are called not only the anointed and the approved, but the appointed. And we are told to prepare ourselves because we're being sent to share the good news of the kingdom of God with everybody around us. And it's a powerful call. It's a powerful task, and we're going to skip. We're not going to skip. We're just going to move real fast. Now, preparing yourself means it's a lot of work, and some of us know about this hard work. Flip to the next one. This is me in high school. Okay. All right. That takes a lot of preparation that I went through. Flip that one before all the men in the room get jealous. That particular, you know how that works, that is a lot of work. I'm suffering from what they call chest of drawers disease, where your chest falls in your drawers. And that's kind of what happened to me from there to here. And I'm just kidding, you know that wasn't me. I guess you already know that. my wife's going to have fun with that later, but she's going to want to know what happened to him. And yeah, it's an amazing thing. I remember so many times watching Rocky, the movie. How many of you have seen them all? Love Rocky, love Sylvester Stallone. And I remember, guys, I did it all. My wife used to fuss at me after probably 7 years of Rocky year after year. You know, they show it over and over on certain channels. They have Rocky Week every year because it's probably the truth. About every other year or every year, I would get into those programs and really get into it. I'm not kidding either. Now, you're talking years ago. And I'd go out and I'd buy me a brand new pair of shoes, sneakers, buy me a brand new jogging outfit, and I'd start running and jogging and spend this money. And about 2 weeks later, I'd take all that stuff and just hide it over there, Hugh. I didn't want anything to do with it. Next year, roll around, same thing, go do the same thing. But that preparation that he gives to Samuel is so important. He says, Samuel, you are the prophet of God, and I'm sending you forth to anoint. And here, fill your horn. Be prepared to go and do this. And Samuel's scared, and he says, Lord, I don't know how to do all that. I really don't know how to do all that right now because I'll get in trouble if I go down in there, and they're going to be trouble because Saul's going to hear about this, and I'm going to be in trouble. And the list goes on. And he says, hey, I'll take care of you. You fill that horn. You go on down there, and that's what we'll do. It's an amazing thing how God calls us to prepare ourselves. And then he says, not only prepare yourself, but he says, move on. Don't get hooked up in the burdens only, in the hard times. We can all do that. We can all worry about something and hold us back. But God says, hey, let some of that stuff go. I want you to stop mourning or being chained by that mourning, and I want you to take a step. I want you to move forward, and I want you to prepare yourself as you do it. And then I want you to move forward. I want you to step out of some of that hurt and some of that pain. And I want you to just move forward. And that's God's call on our lives. And as you look at this next slide, we look back on several weeks now to about week 5 or 4 in the story. And you'll find that Moses was outside in the wilderness, outside of Egypt, in the wilderness with the people. And he had all these Israelites that he and God had brought out of Egypt, out of slavery. And they were stuck right at the Red Sea. Pharaoh was chasing them on one side. The Red Sea was on the other side. And right there, the people began to cry out, and they said, hey, man, hey, Moses, you brought us out here to die in this wilderness. Why did you do this to us? And Moses turns to God and says, you hear you people? And God said, yep, tell them to stop moaning and move forward and see the deliverance of God. Tell them to stop moaning, groaning, and move forward and see the deliverance of God. And sometimes, now that's a big faith picture. You got the Israelites here in the middle, the Egyptians on one side with Pharaoh and his armies, and you got the Red Sea on this side. And God's word to them is, yeah, tell them to stop moaning or groaning and move forward and do it in such a way that they're just like, there's a Red Sea here. And then he says to Moses, raise your staff and watch what happens. And Moses does, and the waters part. See, God calls us to take that step of faith and move forward. He calls us to take that step of faith and invite people and encourage people around us. We don't oftentimes know what people even in our own families are going through. They have all types of problems, and we call that word in the South the mess. We're all in a gom. If you don't know what the word gom means, but you've heard it used, I can tell you what it means. We discovered it back in kindergarten days. When you put your hand under the desk back in those days and you felt all that stuff under it, it was gum that was gommed up in the bottom. So we call it gom, and that's what it was, the gom. And that's what happens in people's lives. They get into a gom. They get into a mess. I like Joyce Meyer's word on the next slide that we found, and it says, only God can turn a mess into a message, a test into a testimony, and a trial into a triumph, and a victim into a victory. If you can find that on the internet, that might be a great word for you to have to hang around with. And our last word for today is simply this: God looks at the heart. God knows your heart. God knows your need. God knows your life. And sometimes you might not think that God's going to bring you healing. Just like Samuel was trying to anoint the best of Jesse's sons to be the king, but there was one that was still out in the wilderness guarding and guiding the sheep that was brought in, and it was David, who became King David, that we hear so much about in the Bible. So when you're moving forward, we recognize that we search inward, reach outward, and that we're always looking upward. My brother-in-law used to remind me, even as I was going through seminary, he said, Carl, just always be reminded that sometime the best theology is neology. The best theology is neology. That's where you bend your knee, and that's where you call out to God for help for all of your problems in life, all of your difficulty, for all of the direction and guidance that we need in life. And part of that gift to all of us is the Lord Jesus, who came and gave himself for us. And on that night when Jesus was with us, he took bread and he gave thanks to God, and he broke that bread and he said, take and eat. This is my body which is broken for you. And then when the supper was over, he took the cup and he said, take and drink all of this in remembrance of me. This is my blood of the new covenant poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. And as we gather on this day, this is what we do. We take this bread and juice and we dip it into this cup, and we hear the words, the body and blood of the Lord Jesus Christ, broken and shed for you. If those who are assisting would come forward. And as they do today, as they serve in communion, I'm just going to be available over here on the left side. If anyone here cares to pray with me or pray on your own, either way, I'm just going to be available. And if you'd like to take a moment and pray over at the prayer corner, you're certainly welcome to.